What if I told you that the life you saw online, the one with the yachts, the private jets, the mountains of cash, and the seemingly endless parties, was all a lie? This isn't just about a celebrity who got caught in a scandal, it's about a man who sold an entire generation of fantasy, and the moment it all came crashing down, for years, Dan Bilzerian was everywhere. He was the king of Instagram, a man who seemed to have figured out the ultimate cheat code to life. He was the I do what I want guy, a self-proclaimed high-stakes poker player and CEO who lived a life so over the top, it felt like a movie. But here's the twist, the movie had a very different ending than we all expected. You see, for over a decade, Dan Bilzerian built his empire on a dangerous illusion. He created a persona so captivating that millions of people wanted to be him. And he sold them the idea that his success was attainable, that if you just worked hard enough, you too could live like a king. But what he didn't show you, what was hidden in the fine print, was the truth behind his extravagant lifestyle. The women, the cars, the parties, everything was a carefully crafted set piece. It was a kingdom built on sand, and the tide was about to turn. So, how did this supposed king go from ruling social media to being exposed as the internet's greatest fraud? And what does his story tell us about the influencers we follow today? We're about to pull back the curtain and show you the real story. But before we get into the wild details, you need to see the first major crack in his kingdom. Was the biggest symbol of his wealth, the famous mega mansion, even real? Keep watching to find out. Now that you know the throne was borrowed, a much bigger question looms in the air: who was footing the bill for this incredibly expensive fantasy? And the answer, as it turns out, was a struggling company called Ignite. For years, Dan Bilzerian touted Ignite as his multi-million-dollar business empire. It was his proof that he wasn't just a lucky poker player, but a legitimate CEO. But as that same whistleblower's lawsuit revealed, Ignite was never a company in the traditional sense. It was a personal piggy bank. The court documents, which became public for all to see, were jaw-dropping. They showed a ledger of a social media obsession so out of control, it was almost unbelievable. We're talking about nearly $1 million a year in expenses, all disguised as business costs. The luxury cars, the extravagant parties, even the models you saw in his posts, they weren't voluntary admirers. They were hired. $26,000, to be exact, just to be part of the brand. Ignite's logo was slapped on everything, a sticker that somehow transformed personal excess into a legitimate business expense. And get this, the same whistleblower who exposed the mansion, a man named Curtis Heffernan, claimed he was fired for refusing to sign off on these wildly inappropriate expenses. He even tried to get Dan to stop renting the $200,000 a month mansion, especially since they were in the middle of a pandemic. Dan's response? He just doubled down, appointed himself chairman of the board, and vowed to throw even more parties. This wasn't about running a business, it was about protecting a carefully constructed lie. And the company, meanwhile, was bleeding money. So if Dan wasn't running a profitable company, and he was taking money from a failing one, where did the money really come from? We'll reveal a family secret that puts this entire story in a terrifying new light, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. The house was a rental, the company was a money pit, and the king of Instagram was losing his crown. But for years, one key question remained unanswered: where did all the money for this lavish lifestyle actually come from? To understand the full story, we have to look beyond Dan and into the shadow of his father, a man named Paul Bilzerian. And this is where the story gets really, really complicated. You see, the name Bilzerian wasn't just a symbol of wild success and excess. It was also tied to a legacy of financial controversy. Paul Bilzerian was a corporate raider in the 1980s, a figure who made a fortune in the cutthroat world of hostile takeovers. But his career came to a crashing halt when he was convicted of several federal crimes, including securities fraud, and was sentenced to prison. He was also hit with a civil judgment from the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, that, with interest, ballooned to over $180 million. A debt he allegedly spent decades trying to avoid. For a long time, Dan maintained that his fortune was his own, built from his skills as a poker player. But as Ignite's financial issues became public, a terrifying new theory emerged. Federal investigators began to allege that Ignite wasn't just a failing company, it was a front. A sophisticated, elaborate plan allegedly orchestrated by Paul Bilzerian himself, designed to funnel his money and hide his assets from the SEC. So the entire kingdom Dan had so carefully built on social media, it wasn't his at all. It was, allegedly, a smokescreen. The question is, how did Dan react when his father's past threatened to completely destroy his future? The answer is a betrayal so shocking, it changed everything. The house was a rental, the company was a lie, and the king was living under his father's shadow. For years, Dan Bilzerian used his family name to build his empire. So what happened when that same name threatened to take it all down? In the most stunning twist of this entire saga, Dan Bilzerian did the unthinkable. He sued his own father. This wasn't some quiet family argument behind closed doors. This was a lawsuit for a staggering $50 million, a public declaration of war against the very men who allegedly funded his kingdom. Dan claimed he was a figurehead for Ignite, that he was merely a face for the brand while his father and other executives ran the company and, allegedly, ran it into the ground. He claimed that he was unlawfully removed from the board of directors and that his image and likeness were being used without his consent. It was a Hail Mary pass, a desperate attempt to protect his brand and rebuild his reputation as an innocent victim. But was he really a victim? Or was this just another performance? The lawsuit forced the public to ask a crucial question: was Dan Bilzerian just a pawn in his father's game, or a willing participant? Was he an unwitting star in a criminal enterprise, or a co-conspirator? The answer isn't so simple, and the lawsuit just complicated things further. But there was one final moment, a grand finale, that would forever change the narrative and expose the final, devastating truth of the king's reign. The collapse of Ignite stock was about to make a lot of people angry, and I mean really angry. Keep watching, because this is where his followers finally woke up. The lawsuit against his own father was a bombshell, but it was just a preview of the real chaos to come. Because while Dan was fighting his family in court, the very company that was supposed to be his fortune was collapsing. And this time, it wasn't just a former employee who was getting hurt. It was the millions of people who had bought into the dream. For a long time, the stock of Ignite was a key part of the myth. It was the real-world proof that the king was a business genius. His followers, many of them young and new to investing, saw it as their chance to get rich. They believed that by investing in Ignite, they were buying a piece of Dan Bilzerian's success. But when the financial documents became public, exposing the lies about the rented mansion and the outrageous expenses, the bottom fell out. The stock began a free fall, and what was once valued at over $5 a share became almost worthless. This wasn't just a financial loss, it was a crisis of trust. For many, the plummeting stock was the final nail in the coffin. The men who had promised them everything had, in their eyes, taken everything. The comments on his social media, once filled with adoration, turned into a storm of outrage. People who had lost their hard-earned money were now calling him out as a fraud. The king of Instagram was no longer a symbol of aspiration, he was a symbol of betrayal. So what did he do when his empire was in ruins, and his followers were turning against him? He did what all con artists do when their old trick stops working, he came up with a new one. And this time, he wasn't selling a lifestyle, he was selling a philosophy. But would anyone buy it? Stay tuned to find out. The stock market crash was the public's wake-up call. The king had lost his crown, his company was in ruins, and his followers were turning on him. You'd think this would be the end of the story. But you'd be wrong. Because when a king loses his kingdom, he doesn't just walk away. He reinvents himself. And Dan Bilzerian's reinvention was arguably his most audacious move yet. He abandoned the over-the-top parties, the yachts, and the women. In their place, he introduced a brand new, highly polished persona, the wise mentor. He launched a new venture called the Sigma Society.
Woman a lot of times responds positively to unpredictability, and so I wanted to teach guys, if I had 2 weeks left on earth, what knowledge would I want to impart? And it's all this stuff, because I would have wanted to have it when I was 20 years old. If somebody would have told me this shit when I was 20, it would have saved me so much time, so many headaches, and I would have just got a lot better results.
A group for men who wanted to achieve self-actualization. The messaging was a complete 180 from his old brand. It was all about discipline, purpose, and living a life of quiet success. Gone were the party photos, replaced by posts about self-improvement, working out, and achieving financial freedom. He presented himself as a guru, a man who had already conquered the world and was now ready to show you how to do the same. But here's the most important question: was this a genuine transformation? Or was it just a desperate and calculated pivot? For many, the Sigma Society felt less like a new beginning and more like a new con. The same followers who lost money on his failing company were now being sold a new philosophy by the very men they felt had betrayed them. The comments on his posts, once filled with rage, now turned to accusations of hypocrisy and demands for him to address the financial mess he left behind. The king was trying to rebuild his empire, not with a company, but with a philosophy. But before he could fully commit to this new persona, there was one final moment, a shocking public confession that would finally bring the entire circus to a close. Get ready, because the final curtain is about to fall. The new Sigma society was a flimsy disguise, and the internet was calling him out. The king was cornered, his old tricks weren't working, and his new persona was being met with ridicule. So he did the one thing nobody expected him to do. He stopped. He stepped away from the flashy, quick-cut Instagram stories and posted a long-form video. It wasn't a party, it wasn't a flex, and it wasn't a motivational speech. It was a confession. In a move that completely shattered his decade-long persona, Bilzerian finally came clean.
99.9% of people listening to this are never going to make a fraction of the amount of money that you've earned.
Yeah, but you know, in some ways that is a blessing because they're going to have a lifetime of being able to buy that pleasure. You got to be climbing the mountain because at the end of the day, like, climbing the mountain is far more satisfying than being at the top of the mountain.
He admitted that the lavish lifestyle was, for the most part, a carefully constructed illusion. A facade built for social media. He confessed that the company was on the verge of bankruptcy and that his family's legal and financial baggage was at the heart of it all. He spoke about the immense pressure of maintaining the king persona and the toll it took on him. And in a stunning display of vulnerability, he apologized. He apologized to his followers, the very people who had lost money on Ignite's plummeting stock, acknowledging that he wasn't the business genius he had claimed to be and that he had made mistakes. This was the end of the show. The final curtain call for the king of Instagram. The confession was a complete break from the character we had all watched for years. It was a rare, raw moment of honesty in a world built on artifice. It brought a sense of closure to a story that had captivated millions and enraged just as many. But what happens after a king loses his kingdom and confesses to the fraud? The final chapter of this story isn't about the money or the lawsuits. It's about the lasting impact of his reign, and the powerful lesson we all learned from the fake king. Don't go anywhere, because the final piece of this puzzle is what matters most. The confession was a shock, but it wasn't the end. The real story, the one that will live on long after the last lawsuit is settled, is the legacy of the Instagram king. So, what did we all learn from this incredible rise and devastating fall? For a decade, Bilzerian was a living, breathing fantasy. He was the ultimate symbol of wealth, freedom, and power, a man who seemed to have hacked the system. But his downfall taught us a harsh and unforgettable lesson: a curated online persona is not the same as reality. The yachts, the parties, the mountains of cash, it can all be a rental, a loan, or a cleverly disguised business expense. He wasn't a king ruling an empire, he was an actor performing a character in a show that was built on a house of cards. This story isn't just about a celebrity scandal. It's a powerful warning about the dangers of blind faith in the digital age. Millions of followers believed in the myth, and many paid the price, losing their hard-earned money on a failing company they thought was a surefire path to success. His journey from an idol to a cautionary tale is a stark reminder that we must always look beyond the flashy aesthetic and question what we're being sold.